How's your Jiminy cricket? Sounds a bit like Cockney rhyming slang, doesn't it? But as we know, I'm sure, that Jiminy cricket was Pinocchio's conscience. So in other words, I'm asking the question, how's your conscience? A conscience is important. It's an important part of who we are because it's our conscience that determines right from wrong. It's our conscience that keeps us, if we apply it properly, onto the right path. I believe there are three places that we can be in regarding our conscience. Two of them I am classing as extremes. The final one, the third one, that's the balance and the place where we should be. So let's look at those three places where we can find ourselves in as far as conscience is concerned. First of all, we can have a seared conscience. The Bible itself in the New Testament refers to a seared conscience, a dead conscience. We can get to that place whereby we're not sensitive to the things that are going on in our lives. I like historical documentaries, and on one particular occasion I recall watching a documentary that was about the Nazi camps, Belsen and Auschwitz and those sort of places. And during the daytime, the people that ran them, the people that worked there, were committing, as we know, terrible atrocities against people, children, adults alike. Terrible, terrible things that they were doing during the day. And then they went home, and this was the clip that I saw of one such Nazi who worked in a camp. Then he went home the same evening and he's listening to classical music and playing in the room with his children. The sort of clip that if you didn't know the person and what he was involved with, you would say he was an ideal, perfect role model of a family man. And that's what happens when our conscience is seared. Our conscience dies so that we lose the differentiating ability, or the ability to differentiate between what's right and what's wrong. Our conscience keeps us on the right path. So we can have that seared conscience. Elsewhere in the New Testament, it talks about conscience being not right. It talks about our conscience being out of sorts. In fact, when people say, I'm okay because my conscience is clear, the Bible itself says that that's not a good judgment. Because just because we say that our conscience is okay, it doesn't mean to say that it is. That our conscience can go to such an extent down a path whereby it becomes dulled, and the sensitivity that we have, or we should have, isn't there. We do something wrong for the first time and we feel bad about it. That's our conscience. That's why conscience is good, because it prompts us and it tells us that we're not doing the right thing. But if we do that thing again for a second time and a third time and a fourth time, eventually we lose our sensitivity. So just because people say my conscience is clear, I'm okay, as that verse that I'm referring to tells us in the Bible, that it's not. It doesn't mean to say we're innocent just because our conscience tells us that it's okay. So we can get, first of all, into that place of a hardened conscience, of a dead conscience, of a seared conscience, where we're not affected by that little gentle prodding telling us that things aren't right. And that is a place to beware of. A lot of people can become very hard in life. Even in church, people can become very hard and lose compassion. Maybe get wrapped up in doctrine. Maybe get wrapped up in some other issues. But out of it all, they become very hardened people and they lose their sensitivity. That's the first place that I'm referring to in my three places that you can be regarding conscience, and it's not a good place to be. The second position that we can find ourselves in regarding conscience is the opposite end of the spectrum. It's where we have an oversensitive conscience. Now, of course, it's good to be sensitive. By being sensitive, it means that we do take into account other people's feelings. We do take into account how other people feel about things, and it puts us in check. So we might be on the internet, or social media, and having a conscience keeps us from posting things which are offensive, from posting things which might upset people, that we don't go blasting away without considering other people's needs, but we actually take into account how other people might be reading the things that we put. So it's good to do that, but we can actually have an oversensitive conscience to the point where we're frightened of upsetting anybody and everybody. So even our legitimately held views, we're frightened to post them because we might upset someone. And certainly as Christians, our views probably will upset people. Views on salvation, Jesus being the only way to God. Views on moral issues won't always go down well with other people. And we shouldn't hold back on what we believe. I believe that if we hold dear to certain truths, then we need to declare those truths. But we don't want to get to the point where we're so sensitive to people, we become oversensitive, if you like, and we don't want to upset anyone. Because if we do, we certainly won't be talking about Jesus, because Jesus divides people. The name Jesus upsets people. Talking about church, talking about God, that upsets people. So if we become oversensitive, our conscience becomes oversensitive, and we don't want to offend anyone, then we'll never talk about Jesus. And if you're a Christian, you have to talk about Jesus, but more to the point, you want to talk about him because he's central to our lives. So we have to beware of that oversensitive conscience, because just as a hardened one, a seared one, a dead one isn't a good place to be in, then neither is an oversensitive one where we become people pleasers. So we start to live our lives to please people. We want to post, we want to say, we want to state, we want to declare what makes other people happy. And we need to be sensitive to a degree, of course. We'll come on to that in a moment. But not to the point where we become oversensitive and we live our lives purely and simply to please other people. And the reality is that we can't please everyone anyway all the time. And then there's that third place, the final position that we can find ourselves in regarding conscience. And that's where we should aim to be. That's the centre. That's the balance. Our conscience isn't dead. Our conscience isn't oversensitive, so we become people pleasers, but we're in a middle place. That we are sensitive to the word. We're sensitive to the Spirit speaking into ours. So we do feel bad, if you like, when we start to do things that we shouldn't be doing, because that's the Spirit speaking into our conscience, telling us that it's not a good path that we start to walk on, and we do something about it. We are sensitive to people. We have to be careful what we post. I don't want to post stuff on the internet that is deliberately intended to upset people, wind people up. I like my football, and football banter's good, but you have to be careful, because for a lot of people, so-called football banter is just an excuse to post hatred and nastiness and vindictiveness. And banter's okay. And if you're a football fan, a soccer fan, then no doubt you support a team and you've got a rival and you like to post stuff about them. In balance, we know where our heart is. That's the important thing. In balance, that's okay, a little bit of fun. But it can get to a point where it's not fun any longer. So we do have to watch what we post. I have views on homosexuality. I have views on morality in general. I have views on the way people live their lives. And I'm happy to declare those views, those opinions that I have. But I'm always careful as well that I don't want to upset people unnecessarily that might not agree with me. I don't want to come over to be judgmental, to come over in such a way that we're putting people down just because they see things in a different way. But I still want the freedom to declare the things that I believe because they would be biblical. So we need that middle ground. We're not hardened. We're not insensitive. We're not going around telling everyone that if you die, you're going to burn in hell forever. Well, we may believe in hell, and we may believe in judgment, and we may believe in the fact that if we die without Christ, then we face a Christless eternity. We believe those things, but the way we communicate them is very important. We want to be sensitive. And in that balance, that framework of sensitivity, that's the place that we should aim to be. So we're not dead, we're not seared, we're not hard, but at the same time, we're not oversensitive either, where we're frightened to declare what we believe because we don't want to offend people. And that's one of the things in our society today. People are frightened generally to say something in case they offend people. We're not allowed in many ways to have an opinion on some things. We're not allowed to stand up and say what we believe. We need to be in that middle ground, whereas we're bold in our faith, but sensitive at the same time. So how's your Jiminy cricket? How's your conscience? Is it dead? Is it seared? Are you doing things that you shouldn't be doing? But your conscience is okay, so therefore you're innocent. The Bible says the opposite to that. If we're living contrary to the word, it means our conscience is dead, our conscience is seared. On the other hand, we might be people pleasers. We might be so afraid to upset people that we keep our Christianity quiet. We may have worked in the same office, the same factory for 10 years, and no one knows that we even go to church because we are frightened of people questioning us about our faith, because it might cause a few uncomfortable issues when we start to talk about the things that we believe. Those are two extremes. They're not good places to be in. But there's that middle ground where we're bold, we're confident, we're happy to declare what we believe, but we are sensitive as well. We are sensitive to the way we live our lives, but also sensitive to those around us. That's the place that we should aim to be in.